There's a procession, I believe, going on today, and so our attendance is being cut quite a bit. But I was actually, before I heard that too much, I was thinking, somebody was telling me they wanted to go see a movie. I won't name the movie, but anyway, they wanted to see no, it was a nice movie, but they wanted to go see a movie, and I said, oh. They asked me if I wanted to go, and I thought, I didn't really want to, and I said, isn't that a sequel? Like Mahabharata 1, Mahabharata 2, and he says, yes. And I says, the sequels are never as good as the original. And so I was thinking, last week we talked about Seva, now we're having Seva 2. And the audience, will probably think the same thing. But I hope not. If some of you are out there on the internet, tuning in online, welcome. And today we're going to take up the topic that we started with last week, which was Ananda Seva. And as I mentioned last week, I wanted to break the topic up into two parts. And the first part, because I wanted to talk about Seva in general, of, what is Seva, what is service. And so that is, I tried to focus more on that. But then, inevitably, that leads to the question of, what is Seva? And then you might say more particularly, what particularly are the topic that we have, what is Ananda Seva? And so I began during the week, I was spending some time on this, and I started to jot down notes. It's, this, that, and another thing. And I realized I can't possibly talk about all of those things in the time allowed, and so I made a handout, and which at the end of the class, not now, because if I pass it now, you're all going to start reading it, and I won't get your attention back. But at the end of the class, I can mention some of these things, but please take a handout at the end, because we can touch the surface on these, but then you can look at it on your own. And this even then is only a very small portion. It could have gone on and on. But I kept it to that. And I wanted to start, first I was trying to think in terms of, to begin with, I wrote on the whiteboard here some ideas generally about Ananda Seva, what is that, but without getting into, again, the specifics. And I wrote down 5 things, but they're overlapping and they're a little bit saying the same thing in a number of different ways, but I wanted to read them so we keep these in mind. Ananda Seva is to infuse our daily lives with an attitude of selfless service. Nishkam karma, really, is what we're speaking about here. But to infuse our lives so that every action is motivated by basic attitudes of service. It's not the action, what I'm saying here, it's not the action specifically that Ananda Seva is setting up chairs, or it's watching or running the video equipment. Now, all of these are, of course, but what's behind that? It's the attitude of selfless service that expresses itself in thousands and thousands of ways. And so Ananda Seva is to infuse our lives with that attitude. How do we do that? And then to practically apply that attitude to whatever we do. You see, this is how do we do that? Put it into practice, because people say, well, I've got the attitude, but it never manifests into anything. And I think here when we're speaking about Ananda Seva, we're saying it's more than just having an attitude, because I don't think you can really have an attitude that's proper unless somehow that's also expressed. So how do you know? If you have that, it has to translate into action. People have great ideals, but they're theoretical ideals, you see. But when we're faced with the cold facts of day, and this is what Sister Gyanamata, of course, said. He says, your spirituality is tested in the cold light of day. And that's so true. We don't want to be armchair yogis. We want to be active yogis or real yogis. And so that too is second. So that's a second. To serve in a manner that deepens our discipleship and attunement with our guru. So here what I'm saying is, Ananda Seva, it's not just Seva, we're saying Ananda Seva, so that must mean something specific. And so what we're trying to do is, long as we're going to serve, why don't we serve in a way that accomplishes and supplements that which we're trying to do generally with all of our spiritual life, which is deepen our attunement with Guru. So why don't we apply our seva in some way, specific way? Because the question comes up, well, what should I do? Well, of course, we could do infinite number of things, but why not do something that also complements attunement with Guru? And so I'll speak a little about that. And then to act in such a way to feel the Guru's presence and be an instrument for him. So that's a little bit more extension of that previous thing. To act in a way so that we're basically, we're trying to be an instrument for the Guru. And of course, the last one is to represent our masters and their mission through our acts of service. And that's a little bit of a restatement of what I mentioned, but it makes it a little bit more specific. So please take these at the end. I wanted to start a little bit by speaking about raising children. Now, some of you don't have children. Some of you do have children. We all have been children. And so we can relate to this in one way or another. But when you're raising a child, which I have done, you begin to see that what a child is basically growing up, they're recapitulating or they're living through in their development physically, but socially, spiritually. They're living through the various stages of development that souls go through generally. Now, Swami in his EFL, he talks about various stages of development of first the body, learning to control the body, then learning to control the emotions, and learning to control the will, and then ultimately learning to refine the intellect as well. And these are just natural stages as a child grows up, they go through. But a little child, particularly what I'm focused on here, you see this development of ego development and refinement take place in a child. And if you have children, you probably notice this. When a child is born, it is very little, it's totally consumed with its needs, as it would be, but then it starts to get up a little bit, and they start to run around. And they're very much consumed with the relationship they have with their parents, because their parents have brought them up, and so they're very much wanting to please a good child, and most children are this way. They want to please the parent. They want to do the right thing for their parent because they want that development of love with the parent. So there's very much focus on the parent, but even more so, there's a big focus on me. Number one, a child somehow is inward. When they're very small, the rest of the world doesn't much exist beyond their own needs. They're the center of the universe, except also the parent also. They're the center of that universe. And it's only as they grow up that they begin to realize, oh, there are other people too. And you go to a little kindergarten, preschool, kindergarten, and the teacher very patiently is share your toys with the other children, whatever. And the mother and the father, of course, they're doing this too. They're having a very important discussion, meeting, perhaps neighbors are over. They're talking about maybe something serious, and the child will run in right in the middle of it, mommy, and oblivious to that there's something larger going on. And of course, the parents, very patiently, teach that child little by little to become aware that there's something more than their own personal little needs. And you could say that encapsulated in that slow development that hopefully takes place and gets to the point where they begin to think, there are other people here. Now, sometimes, for some children maybe, that's where it ends. They don't really get, yes, there are others, that means I have to, I have to arrange my own strategy a little bit more here to succeed in what I want. But children that keep on growing, they begin to realize and are trained, and their parents teach it how to have manners, how to relate with other people. They come to that point, if they have enough, you might say, spiritual development, to realize that not only do they want to please their parents, please themselves, but their happiness actually lies in making other people happy as well. That when they share their happiness, when their friends are happy too, and we play together and we all share, they learn to be able to extend the boundaries of what their happiness is to something even larger. And so they slowly begin to realize, yes, there's a bigger world, and that world of expansion begins to grow and grow and grow, until finally they become a very refined adult, and they see the world at large. If I help to make other people happy, the world at large, I too am happier in this way. And this is the natural progression. But encapsulated in that is this very basic principle that turning our attention away from me to something outside of me is the basic principle of the spiritual path. When we're consumed with myself, that basically is a definition of ego. We're egoic in that way. What's in it for me? What's the return on my investment in giving you energy, doing something for you? That's obviously very self-centered. And the spiritual path, and what we speak about the development of attitudes, what we have practices, is learning to turn our attention away from ourselves to others, and away from ourselves. And this is encapsulated with what Krishna says with Nishkam Karma. Ultimately, acting in such a way that without the desire for the fruits of the action. It's good action, right action, serving other people, and yes, our happiness, you might say, comes back to us, but in a sense, that's a spiritual action. That's a godly action, because everybody is benefited. And this is, you could say, the mark of a noble person, a warrior, a person who's serving others, who wants to do something for other people. They reach that point in their spiritual evolution. So when we speak about service, we want to see it. In what ways can we, in what we do in life, turn our attention away from me, number one, toward others. And this is and so parents teach their children to do little chores around the house, not necessarily because the chores need to be done, but in order to teach that, well, you have to serve, get out of yourself, don't be thinking. And you look at people, even when they get to be adults, a lot of the major problems that people have that lead to their unhappiness in life tends to be because of thinking about oneself. And so if you want to help that child overcome those future difficulties, we would teach them that, to get out of yourself, think of others, and you'll find that your own problems begin to dissipate. Now, there's many ways that we can do this. Now, last night, a few of us went to dinner at one of the Sangha members, and because I was thinking about this, I couldn't help but notice, and it reminded me of this very nice tradition. Guest is God, right? This is a wonderful way to think. The guest is God. Now, we all know this, and actually, like last night, it was actually being put into practice because I was being served this wonderful meal, and people, you know how it is, you go to somebody and the hostess and her mother it was just very nice meal. But the attitude of service, of trying to please the person who's come, this is something I think most people, well, let's say refined people have some refinement. Everybody understands this. As you treat the guest properly and nicely, because standing before you is a representative, you might say, of something larger. Ideally, the guest is God, representative of the God, and that what we're doing is we're not serving that person individually. We're actually serving something beyond that. That person is just a symbol from. Now that takes a little bit more effort, and it's not always something that is happening, but how do we make that transition? We have to practice. We have to practice by doing simple acts of service over and over again. And by serving our friends, serving our fellows, serving our immediate family, this is, I think most everybody understands that this is something we do, and it's part of being civilized, is to serve one another in this way. But then what happens then? There seems to come a boundary line where somebody is oblivious to anything beyond that boundary line. The person standing who's come to dinner, but what about the person that's further out? So, that's where we have to use our conscious attention to try to be able to expand that boundary, to transition from the guest is God till all our expressions of Divine Mother. Yesterday I was walking home from here, and I couldn't understand, I thought it, because I'm thinking of this topic, of course, it came into my mind, but I was walking home, and there's a guy over by the market over there, the Lakshmi market. The guy was pulling out of his car, and I was walking, and he looks at me. He sees me. Here I am. And he turns, and he almost runs me down. His mirror just missed me, just sort of, almost caught the edge of, and I jumped, and I thought, the guest is God. That guy, now, if he would just sort of did it because he didn't see me, that would be totally different. But he did, because I sort of made contact with him, and he almost ran me down. I thought, now this guy was a well-dressed man. I thought, why did he do that? Why didn't he go carefully? But it was like he didn't care. And I thought about that. I thought, we have to pay attention to that. Well, now, first I thought he had to pay attention to that. And I was thinking, that guy, why did he do that? I was a little bit kind of miffed at him. And then I thought, well, wait a minute now. I need to, I'm probably miffed at him because I'm probably done that myself. You're out on the road, and people become impersonal. In other words, you know somebody, you don't do that. And somehow when you get behind in a car is you get behind the wheel of the car, and everybody turns into objects. You lose that personal contact. And I thought, now what do we do to correct that? To be able to actually see, here stands before me God. Guest is God. The stranger is God. Everybody's God. To be able to treat that person with respect is what you would do. Now, I don't have necessarily the answer here, but it did raise the question, how do we begin to do that? And again, I think it comes down to we have to practice. We have to practice seeing other people outside of our family, outside of those people we know, and to be, in a sense, look at them as human beings, as people with souls, with problems, with troubles. And I've made it a practice, and I think that what I try to do is when I'm walking here to there somewhere, usually you're just walking, it's just objects passing you. But make it a practice. When you see somebody coming, you don't have to stare at them or, make eye contact. I'm not saying that. But realize that a person that's coming, that is a live person. And try to feel that person. I don't know that person, but it's a real person. And to make that sort of silently, And you're looking at that person, you're looking at that. They have troubles, they have their difficulties, and try to relate to people as real individual people. And I found you start to make a connection in a sense. I'm surrounded by all of these potential friends that are here with me. And you start to make some sort of break or connection and break that barrier down that separates us from other people. And then you find that then you can act, that's a form of service in a way. Now, Swamiji said service is of three kinds. You have the actual physical service, you have spiritual service, but she says you have mental service as well. Your kind thoughts are serviceful to other people. And if you interact with people, your positiveness uplifts other people around you. Your charitableness, not necessarily in action, but of heart, actually affects the world around you. And you will begin to notice that the world itself begins to, if you do this strong enough, and you begin to affect the world around you. And this is the type of service, it's a spiritual service, you might say, to approach people on that level. But the larger point here is learning to turn that direction of thinking of yourself to learning to reach out to other people and see them, the world around you, as real people, not as objects. And to be able then, of course, the next element, as we could interject into that, is bringing a level of serving those people. And this is why we have to, again, train ourselves to do acts of service. And so when we have, in any way it's possible, helping the person across the street, you might say, or whatever it might be, but it begins with that mental attitude of wanting to serve somebody. Now, if we're serving, and this comes to the point here, this third one especially, if we're serving, what can we do practically in a way that helps to deepen our discipleship? Now, what do I mean by that? When you do service to some, let's say you have a neighbor, and perhaps you make meals for that neighbor because they're ill or something. You say, "Oh, I'll help that person." Or maybe you have a neighbor and you go over there and you take care of their flowers or whatever it might be. As you do that, you have to attune yourself to that person. You think about that person. Oh, so she doesn't like this kind of food. She likes that kind of food. Oh, she doesn't, she likes these flowers, not that flowers, or whatever it might be. You have to when you start to serve in a fashion, you put your mind to it, and you begin to attune yourself to what you're doing. So you begin to take on that consciousness. Now, Narayani wrote a book about Swami, her life with Swami in those last years of serving him. And she said a very interesting thing in there. She said, I had to learn everything about Swami's needs. What did he need? And she said, I had to attune myself to him in order that I might anticipate them. So she said, through that, I got to the point where she was able just to, and she knew exactly what he wanted. So consequently, as this went by, when people would come to him with requests, and he would just send them to Narayani and say, Narayani, you deal with it. Because he knew that she was in tune with his needs and what he would say, and she let her act in that way. And so the point here is, if you take up service of doing something, it will attune you to what you're doing. And this is natural. So why not, if that's the case, and we want to be disciples, why not take up something that is going to attune us to what our overall goal is of discipleship as disciples? And this, of course, as we name it Ananda Seva, is doing that seva which helps us attune to that which we're trying to achieve. Now, all seva, of course, is going to be good. It's not a matter of good or bad. This is good, but then using a portion of that for something that's going to serve our larger purposes. And so we do those things. What's going to help attune us to what our discipleship is? And this brings us, of course, to what Master said. He said, if you want to be in tune with me, serve my work. Now, we need to understand, what did he mean by my work? Now, this has to be understood in big and cosmic scale, and also, you might say, on the microcosmic scale. What is the work of any guru? Is to help the disciples to become free. Right? So that's the work, you might say, for a guru-disciple relationship. His work is to help you shed those things that are keeping you from freedom and to learn that. And so consequently, if I was to serve that work, for me, doing anything that helps me become a better, lead me to freedom, if I do it in the sense of Guru's name, thinking of the Guru as I do that, I'm bringing myself in attunement with the Guru. And so in the larger sense, trying to become a better, to know God, to do my sadhana, to do whatever it is that is going to help me toward freedom, that in one way is to attune myself to the Guru. But then, of course, he said, serve my work. Well, that's the larger work, but is a master like Paramahansa Yogananda, an avatar, he came up to bring joy to millions of people, worldwide populations of people. And so consequently, to be a representative of that vibration that he brought into the world, well, this too is a way to attune ourselves with Master's work, as we become representatives of his vibration to the world at large. And so if you're going to become, or like it says in the Mahabharata, all of Krishna's soldiers were like Krishna, because they were his soldiers, and they were attuning to him, so they represented Krishna. And so consequently, I think in the same way, all of Yogananda's soldiers are like Yogananda. And if you're not, just maybe are you being a good soldier? So we have to, and so what is it like to be like Yogananda? Well, he had certain qualities to him, but let's take joy, for instance. He was joyful. He was sympathetic and loving. So for us to attune ourselves to Yogananda would be, of course, to take on those qualities and to express those qualities. Now, if we want to do it in even a deeper sense, it would be to express those qualities while thinking and expressing as a representative of our Guru, to, in a sense, be his instrument in what we're doing. Swami Kriyananda said that in his very first years of discipleship with Yogananda, Yogananda would do the Sunday satsang, and then afterwards he would have various monks stand at the doorway as people left and greet each person. Because Master, busy, he couldn't do all of those things himself, so he assigned it to the disciples. So the monks would stand there at the doorway and greet each person as they left, and say a few words. And after Swami did that, I think maybe first time or after the first few times he went to Yogananda, and he said, "Sir, I really don't want to do that anymore. It's just exhausting." If you've ever done this, you know how it is. People, they have needs. They want to draw something from you. They have questions, and you're sort of wanting the line to keep going, but they're, and so you could feel they're pulling something maybe from you. So Swami was like that. He had that reaction. And Master said, well, that's, of course, was because he wasn't representing Master. He wasn't letting Master flow through him with Master's vibration. And Master instructed him that, get yourself out of the way. Get yourself out of the way. And then allow that flow of Master's flow, because as his representative, we want to get ourselves out of the way. And so this comes back again, for us to serve in Master's name, to serve Guru, is to allow thinking of Guru, but again, not think, how do you get yourself out of the way? You just have to, you could say, through discipline perhaps, but it's also thinking of Master as you're doing something, serving in that vibration, and in a sense, if you take on those qualities, attune yourself, you take on those qualities temporarily, you've put your own individuality aside, you could say, and you can serve in that way. So in Swamiji, I'm sure began to think in terms of keeping Master in mind in everything he did, and thank you, Master flow through me to this person. And of course, this is what the person learns as we become a disciple and we're serving other people, is to, in the back of your mind, or at least I do this, I'm sure you do too to some extent, is you're thinking, Master, serve this person. Person comes up, they ask a question. How do you, whatever it might be, or I have this, can you give me advice? And the tendency is to look back in your own life and give them a piece of advice that, well, this worked for me. And you tell them that. Now, that may not be bad advice, but I think it's better is not to talk about, just as discipline, don't talk about yourself. Don't give your personal, well, this happened to me. And because immediately, what do you do when you say that? You start talking about yourself. And you're giving, and that better to think, Master, what does this person need? And try to look at it from their perspective. Now, I'm not saying sometimes your experience may be what that person needs, but don't start there. Think in terms of what's this person needing. And sometimes you start with just giving them a blessing, just mentally. And you're saying, well, I don't know, but Master said this and Master said that, and I remember Swami did this and Swami did that. And if you do have an experience that is perfect as an answer, oftentimes the best way to give that story is said, I had a friend who had that experience. And what the friend did is X, Y, Z. That friend happened to be you, might say in some other time, but you don't personalize it to yourself, you see. Is let it, because then, now this is relative, but as a discipline, I think you're more likely to not get caught up in your own story at that way. If you're serving in this capacity of devotees are coming, they're asking for advice, sort of depersonalize it a little bit and try to draw Master in to flow through you at that time. And you'll find that somehow you say something, which is I found to be often the case, if not most of the time. I thought I was saying this, but the person heard that. And lots of times it's much better. What they heard is not necessarily what I meant to say. And maybe I really didn't say that, but what they heard is what they needed. And I think it comes because if you're thinking about, Master, I don't know what this person needs, but you give it your best. But somehow the person will often attune to something deeper. And I don't know how that works, but it's happened many, many times. The person, because I think what they're doing is if you're thinking about Master as being a disciple and trying to serve that person, somehow they pick up on the vibration, you see. The vibration of helpfulness, that you're trying to help in Guru's name, sincerely. And that vibration somehow harmonizes something for them. Like again, I can't intellectually explain it, but I think it has something to do with that if you are in tune. You see, so when we serve, coming back, think in terms of doing service in a way that's going to harmonize you with Master. Now he said, serve my work. Well, I've spent it in the larger sense that I've mentioned it, but also Master as an avatar had a mission, a specific mission as well. He had the general mission, but he had a specific mission of reaching out to various disciples. And we can, in a specific way, we have to do something. So why not serve, in this case, why not serve through Ananda? Because Ananda trying to, in the highest sense, trying to be a representative of Master. Now, I don't say that selfishly, because I happen to be a representative of Ananda and officially, but I mean it because by focusing on whatever you do, and if you're a member of a different organization, serve that organization, because it brings a certain amount of power to your service to help people. If that's your focus of trying to help people, if you associate with a power greater than your own, other people, there's a sangha. You're representing a collective energy, and when you align your energy with other people, you become much stronger. Just like the story of the sticks, and the Father, if you very difficult to break many sticks, but one stick by itself is easy to break. I know when I met Swami, I mentioned this to a story last night. We were talking that he asked me to help him personally. I took it personally. He said, "Would you help me?" And I said, "Yes, I'd be happy to help you." And so that's how I ended up getting involved in Ananda in the first place. And he had certain things he wanted me to do. But by doing that, I thought I was helping him personally, which I hope it was. But really, there was a larger thing. I came to realize that I was actually helping Master's work also. And I realized that through doing that, I associated myself with a much larger energy inadvertently. Because there were other people that were also serving. And I think this is the benefit of serving with a group of people, is that you find that you are strengthened in your service, and you're strengthened and by serving, and those other people also, which I came to learn later, are good opportunities to serve also. And because serving other people and serving your gurubhais can sometimes be challenging. Because people are people, And you find that when you're in a group of people, to serve each other is a wonderful way to build harmony and strength and qualities when you're within yourself. And so this applies more than just in a spiritual work. If you're in an office, if you serve your office mates, you're going to find that you're going to be more successful in your office. It just happens that way because you become a person who is somebody who is able to build on the strength of a group and bring a group together, and you're going to find you're going to be able to get much more done. Now, there's lots of practical reasons why that's so, but in whatever group that you're working in, whether it's spiritual, business, serve your neighbor, your coworker, whoever it is that you interface with, and you find that you begin to expand your aura, you become larger, and immediately you'll start to gather in strength to what you're doing, and you'll become successful. Sometimes people think there are exceptions, of course, but people think just going it alone is the mark of a true leader. It's not really true. A true leader is somebody who serves other people. And that's the mark of leadership. And this is what Swami made a specific point, and he mentions this in his Art of Leadership book, but he would choose people, which he would do, people needed to do various tasks, and he would look for leadership potential in people. He was always on the lookout. And he would say that one of the first criteria he would look at is he would pick people that had a propensity to think of other people before they thought about themselves. And if he found that quality in somebody, he would go after them. In a good way. Not in a bad way, in a good way. He would bring them in. Because that's what's his criteria. Whereas if he found somebody who's very competent about something, but they tended to think of themselves first, their needs, their happiness, their problems, if all of those things, he would tend to he wouldn't go that way. He wouldn't bring them in as leadership material. And this is something to keep in mind. And so if you're whatever your circumstances are, be somebody who thinks of the welfare of people around you. And you see this in any group dynamic. Any group of people, there are those people who are, oh, it's him again. And there are other people that are naturally, people are going to bring about good for the whole. And they think that way naturally. That's the people that are going to be successful in life. And the various skills that are needed, those will be learned along the way. But they have the human quality to be able to be successful and draw to them whatever they need to be successful in the outward task that they're doing. And so this is something to keep in mind as well. Serve the person in front of you as God. The guest is God. Now that's a pretty high statement, but the principle is there, is that we extend our sense of identity to a larger and larger group, and eventually the guest is God. Now, how to get to that point? How do we start? And this is, I think, mentioned a couple of weeks ago. Somebody was doing satsang here. I don't remember who it was. But they were talking about practicing the presence of God. I think much of it, to serve God, you have to feel that sense, well, God's here. God is around me. God is in the people that are around me, expressing through that. And I think to get to that point, we have to feel that presence. So this practice of practicing the presence of God every moment in your day is a step that is, you might say, corollary to serving all as God, but also maybe even primary to it, because you have to bring that sense of God being right there. Because when you're in God's presence and you have that sense that God's with me, here around me, the natural impulse is to serve. It's not, you don't have to think about it. It just comes naturally. Because if you feel God's presence, when Babaji appears to Yogananda and visits him, or when his guru appears to him in the hotel, the natural impulse is to fall at his feet. It just comes natural. And it's the same thing. If God is there with you, you want to worship God. You want to serve God. You want to do whatever is coming that's natural for you, the heart. Just like little children, they naturally, I think, now some may disagree with me, and I'm sure there are not all kids are the same, but I think, or I at least like to approach children, that they want to be helpful. They want to love their parents. They love their parents, but they want the parents' approval. But there's a natural ability, when you want the parents' approval, you want to serve, you want to help, you want to be useful. I think it's somewhat in healthy children's nature to be that way. And it's the same thing for us. So if we see God, practice that presence of God. Now, there's many different books that have been written about that. And I think if a couple of very good ones, if you want to read them, is one by Brother Lawrence. It's some hundreds of years old. I don't know what century he lived in, but it was a long time ago. He says, Practicing the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. Very, very wonderful book. Little book. And the other one was the story of Frank Laubach, who's a missionary somewhere in the Philippines or somewhere. But he he took up the conversation of speaking to God every moment of his day. Now, I think this is also a good place to start. Have you introspected and thought about the thoughts that are running through your mind during the day? Most of us are having a conversation of some sort. We're conversing, or we're observing and mentally commenting on what's happening around us. That guy just about hit me with his car. That bump, then from there, it's going on. But look at that. There's the fruit walla, he's over there. And the taxi driver's there. And look at that, this new sign over there. Isn't that so? There's just a constant conversation going on in there. And observational commentary. Change that. Or no, wait a minute. Change it in a little way. I'd say this. Who are you speaking to? Maybe that's the better question. Who are you talking to? So I'm not saying don't do that, but think about, or at least at the start, think about who are you talking to? Well, you're probably talking to yourself, maybe, or some personification of some listener. Who's the listener? Why don't you think, in our case, maybe why don't you make Guru the person you're talking to? Now, if Guru is to who you're talking to, you maybe won't want to be respectful. What you say. You may want to watch your language and of how you. But if you're you're saying, Guru, why'd that guy almost run me over? And that wasn't nice. And then I would probably not get angry about it in my mind, and I would just bring Guru into the conversation, and then from this. So I'm saying, don't necessarily stop what you're doing, but bring Guru in to be your companion. Then, as you do that, then maybe you want to change the conversation. You see, but first bring him. You take it step by step. Bring Guru into the conversation. Then your conversation begins to change, and then look at that. There's the fruit walla over there, Master. I wonder what he's got in his basket today. So you start talking. And you start making that a reality for you. And it becomes more and more serious. And then you start asking. You can say, Master, this is I really need help. Or something. You can start having that conversation too. Now, it has to go one step further though. When you're having a conversation, it implies that word con at the beginning means together. That's a Latin word meaning together, or something like that. You got to listen. You can't be talking all the time. So you have to, and that's of course what our meditation is with our communion. That's again, COM is bringing it together. We start to develop that relationship of talking, listening, including until you begin to see that Master's not just somewhere else. You begin to see that Master's in the world around you. You see, it'll start to go step by step. And then you begin to see that everything becomes part of that, of your world. And then from that, it's very easy to serve. Because if you see Guru in the world around you, you naturally want to serve. So this is something why don't you try that? See if you can start to make that a reality. Now, if you can't do that, do something that's serviceful to other people, or to an entity, to a work, to a cause, to an ideal, whatever it is. Do something that takes you out of yourself, so that you're not thinking about my needs. You're thinking, I'm going to serve somebody else. Remember, there's that story about the lady who was in the nether regions after dying. And what was that? Oh, I lost this. The story was something about the carrot came down. Master told this story, and because she was reached down, and she had done no good deeds her whole life, except once upon a time she gave a rotten carrot to a beggar. And because of that, it became her rope to pull her out of heaven. I don't think she actually made it out, though, in the story. But but nevertheless, it was that even one little tiny deed was her raft, you could say, her chance to get out of where she was. And so think of that. So what can we do in our life, just serving in that way? And you'll find that your life will change. As you begin to do that, you begin to put into motion a whole other set of forces and magnetism that begins to draw to you a whole different life. And this is what happened with me. I said yes to Swami, and my whole life changed. And it took me in a whole different pathway. Now, there's another aspect also of service, and this is financial support. Now, that's always a sensitive one because, you're talking about money. But of course, money is just energy, is what it is. And is being able to serve in that way. But there was an interesting story that, in that regard, because I have to mention this financial side because there's a lot of truth to it. There was, at Ananda Village, there's a lady who had her grandfather's brother, great uncle, was an uncle, a distant relative, but from the 1920s, 1930s. And he actually had met Master and become a disciple. And he was involved with a center, I don't know, maybe St. Louis, I'm not sure. And he had problems, physical challenges and whatnot. And Master wrote him a letter that I think I wrote on here, part of it. But Master was encouraging him to help his local center, which was having difficulties. And he says, God supports your business by giving you talent and health, even though you have overused your energy, because he was ill. So your business should support God's work. And if you do so, His law will give you untold protection. Above all, communion. In other words, he was saying if he would support God's work, God would support him to the highest extent of giving him God communion. Now that's amazing. And it's not so much the outward gift as it is the attitude of willingness to support something larger outside of oneself. And that's really the key to it. It's the attitude of not thinking of oneself and using that representation of energy to go outside of oneself. I still have actually, I have at Ananda Village we still do, and the children were always fundraising, asking for money. And I made it a practice, if a child came up and it was a good cause, and it was. If a child came up and asked me for money for a good cause, I would always give it, no matter what, because it was supporting a good cause. And so they would raise money for all sorts of things, and I'd always give money. And so except I drew the line. I says, you've got to appear before me. I'm not going to do email. Email appeals I will not respond to, but if you're standing in front of me, I will give you money. And then I still have another practice, is that if you go to a sangha like this, and in America they always have the tradition of passing a basket around. It could be for anything. Sometimes big occasions, just little occasions, groups get together, oh, pass the basket to pay for the coffee or the biscuits or whatever. So you'd put something in the basket. So I said, I will always put something in the basket. And whatever's in my wallet, I'm going to put in there. So I'd pull my wallet out, and it'll be $1, maybe 65 rupees or whatever it is. I said, okay, I'll give him $1. But sometimes if there wasn't $1 in there, I had no dollars. I only had $10. Okay, I said, I'm going to put it. I put it in there. You know, I have to give something, and whatever I got. My God, there's only a $20 in here. And it was an affirmation. I says, I will never let that basket go by without putting something in there. It got up to $100 once. That's all I had. I had a $100 bill and no other change. But $100 bill. But it was, the idea here is, you know, it was sort of, I've been doing this a long time. That only happened one time because I always made sure to carry dollars, you know. But the idea is forms, I mean, little fun things, little affirmations that I'm going to serve, I'm going to give, I'm going to share. And you find that it can become fun, and you begin to break down that tendency. And money is a difficult thing because money is very attachment creating. If it was something other than money, you wouldn't think about it so much. But because it's money, somehow it means some people are a little bit more attached than others. But it's not so much the money as it is the attachment. To learn to break that attachment. And when you can learn to break it, you find that somehow, as Master said, he said, I've got a little box with money on my table and it's never empty because it always stays full. It's sort of the loaves and the fishes type of principle. And that's true. And I found that generally to always be, or actually to be true, is to just break that attachment, and you find that then there's a freedom that begins to come, and then God will take care of you. And I think this is what we're trying to do here. But as long as you're giving, why not give to Master's work? Give in some fashion. And make it a principle, make it a practice, and you'll find that then you're accomplishing more than one task at a time. So I'm starting to run out of time, so let me just quickly mention a few points. Oh, just one more thing on money. There's an attitude, Master, this is worth the whole talk in itself, but there's an attitude that money is not spiritual. Is energy spiritual? Yeah. So I mean, is energy not spiritual? So it's not. And there's a saying that is often quoted. People say, "Money is the root of all evil." Maybe you've heard that. It's a misquote, because the real quote is, "The love of money is the root of all evil." It's the love of money. It's the attachment. That's the root of all evil, not money itself. It's just because money is just a thing. It's the attachment that we want to come. So Master said he had a quote. He said, Master said, making money honestly and industriously to serve thy work is the next greatest art after the art of realizing thee. So you see in Master's life, his most advanced disciples, many of them, were businessmen. The people, because what did they have? They had money, but they had energy, you see. And that's what making money requires, energy. You see, energy to put it. So he says the art of making it, the art of attracting energy, is a great art to be able to do that. But don't hold on to it. Let it pass through, and you find that then you're enhanced, the world is enhanced, and of course to serve, we have to take responsibility for that energy too, because you have to appropriately use your energy. And so you don't want to waste it, or else you close off the flow of prosperity if you misuse your money. You have to use it wisely, in a good way, in a way that's sharing. Again, one further area that could be explored is, if you're going to do something in service, do God-reminding activities, if you can find them. Do things that remind you. So consequently, if you're cleaning, obviously, I think this is why people enjoy fixing the altar. It's a God-reminding activity. But how do you take that consciousness of that benefit that comes from fixing the altar, how do you take that to cleaning the kitchen? Then you have to be able to say, okay, is that God reminding too? Well, orderliness, cleanliness, purity, out with the old, in with the new, removing those things that don't belong there. All of those things could be, of course, applied inwardly as well. But if you can do things that are God reminding, that is very helpful to you. And then the next step, you could say, is learn to bring God as a reminder into whatever you do, you see. Because the first step is just to passively be reminded. Second is to actively bring God into whatever action that we do. How does this apply? And I think you can be creative, and you can find that, God's here too. God's in everything we do. And if we do that, then we find that the act of service becomes real for us, becomes enjoyable, and we find that we bring God into our equation, and we feel Master's presence in what we're doing. So I'm going to stop it there. I've gone a little long. Any question that might be here? Yeah, so I can't answer many, but Pranya, what is your question? Wait, let me give you this, because I think they're recording this.
Did it ever happen to you about Swami giving you some work, and it was a disciplined work, and you thought that he's punishing you, or he's making you down, and he wants to be boss of you? Have you thought of that kind of things?
Of course, if a spiritual teacher would never do that, in other words, with that intention, but I think a disciple could interpret it that way. But that does happen in the business world. That does happen in the business world, and one has to be able to transcend that and be able to take whatever comes to oneself and be able to do it in a positive spirit and turn a negative thing like that into something positive. But again, it comes developing that quality of non-attachment, but still doing the appropriate right thing at the same time. And so that dynamic, you find that happening. But from a spiritual point of view, like somebody like Swami, I never in my engagements with him, he gave me tasks to do, but he was the most respectful fellow. Even that when he asked me the very first time, he says, "Would you help me?" He would almost always phrase a request of something he wanted to see done he would frame it as a request. So he would always give the person a chance to say yes or no. You see, he would never demand anything. You always had the choice. Yes, I can say yes and do this. No, I'm sorry, Swami, I don't want to do it. But then, of course, I wouldn't take exact, no, well, wait a minute, I shouldn't say that. It's like Janamata said, or her advice to the fellow women renunciates at the ashram. You remember, you've read this. She would say, when Master asks you to do something, say yes and make it snappy. Don't even think about it. She would say, say yes and then think about it later, how you're going to accomplish that. And I think that's very good advice. And so in a sense, that's when Swami asked for something, that's how I approached it. But then I always found he always gave you a choice. And I think that was respectful. And then when somebody is respectful to you, you're likely to be respectful to them. But it works the other way too. If you're respectful to somebody else, you're more likely that that person will be respectful back to you. So it's a two-way thing. Okay, let's leave it for there. Thank you all very much.